The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
Cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
The nation desperately seeks a return to the life we all knew. And Joe Biden finally breaks his silence on scandalous allegations against him. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. We're all looking for unconventional wisdom in this time of crisis like none we've ever known, and we've got exactly that for you today as we welcome in a guy who really is the smartest guy in the room, Victor Davis Hanson, he of towering intellect who's dispensed more wisdom on the downdraft from the coronavirus than anyone. He will join us in a moment. Plus, we've got our signature segment, Say What, all about Joe Biden finally responding to serious allegations of sexual assault. LibertyNation.com editor-in-chief Leesa K. Donner on how President Trump should open up his press briefings beyond the elite media, which defames him endlessly. And LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza jumps on board for Talkin' Liberty, featuring the gun control lobby dodging a bullet, Georgia making people pay to access the state's laws, and the Attorney General of the United States threatening to sue states that don't lift pandemic orders. When everything we hold dear and thought was virtually unassailable starts to crack under the pressure of an unprecedented crisis such as the one we're in the middle of right now, 30 million people, almost 20% of America's workforce filing for unemployment in the last 6 weeks, a 5% downturn in an economy roaring as 2019 turned to 2020, now headed inexorably toward recession. We turn to those with a deeper understanding of history and politics and human behavior. And high up on that list is one of America's leading conservative minds, Victor Davis Hanson, man of arts, Renaissance man, columnist, and I might add, a farmer in the red part of California who has written a piece entitled "It's a Free Country, Brother," which places this crisis, or what it has revealed about us and is likely to spawn, in just the kind of context we're all groping for these days. And he joins us now. Dr. Hanson, welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio.
Thank you for having me.
In a matter of perspective, the entire human race has been brought low by a virus from a bat. Or, as you write, a little horned devil virus seems to be trying to do what those Ruskies never could. You would think this would unite our species at some level, but as you point out in your article, it's hardly done so. Has the media simply played this whole thing like another Trump scandal? And how different might this crisis be if the media simply played it straight and didn't continue their 90+% negative coverage of this president?
Well, it would be a lot different, but we're getting closer and closer to the election. So this is Robert Mueller and impeachment on steroids, because for the Democratic progressive agenda, time was running out. There was a booming economy. There was a new foreign policy that was working. China was an extremist in this trade war. It wasn't doing well. And so I think once this thing came along, and I shouldn't say I think, I'm just quoting their own words. Remember, Hillary Clinton, in an interview with Joe Biden 4 days ago, said as the old saying goes, you can't let a crisis go to waste. And that's not an old saying. That was a new saying in 2008 by Rahm Emanuel, or a former advisor, about the earlier financial meltdown. Remember, Gavin Newsom, governor of California, said this is an opportunity to readdress capitalism and get a more progressive government. So I think a lot of people, especially as we saw in that Democratic primary, those agendas were not very popular. New Green Deal, wealth tax, abolish ICE, Medicare for everybody, illegal alien, universal health care. But they rebirth almost like zombies. They're back because they feel amidst the panic and hysteria, government, especially at the state level, because it's not controlled by the Republicans, can do things they otherwise would never dream of getting away with. And we've seen it. In some sense, the First, Second, and Fourth Amendment don't really exist right now. People can be terrified that this virus is just something that we've never seen in 2017. We never saw it in 1968. We never saw it in 1957, all of which were severe flus, with so far either the same or much more death, and didn't require this lockout. Then if they can convince people of that, we'll stay locked down, we'll go into a depression, and we're going to have the largest redistributionist agenda you've ever seen.
Well, let me ask you a simple question with a complicated answer, most likely. Have we as a nation, in the face of this crisis, overreacted, underreacted, or reacted about properly?
I think we were doing pretty well until about 2 weeks ago, and by that I mean it was very hard to react properly when not only the Chinese government lied about the origins and nature of the transmissibility of the virus, but the World Health Organization was a megaphone for those lies. So we didn't get accurate. And then with the FDA and the test kits and the NIH and the CDC, they all were confused about and Trump followed the experts' advice, which was wrong. And then finally, we started doing things pretty well. We got the test kits going. We got these industries synchronized. We got private enterprise in on it. We got people working together. The lockdown was probably wise to so-called flatten the curve flatten. All of these facilities were underutilized. But right around now, or a week ago, we started to discover that more people are going to die from misdiagnostic screenings, surgeries, anxieties, suicide, family and substance abuse than the virus itself, which is proving a lot more maybe infectious and widespread, but a lot less lethal. And our reactions to it were predicated on a faulty scientific model that, for the first time in an epidemic in recent memory, we took the denominator, that is the number of cases. With the full admissions, we didn't know if it was correct. In fact, I would go further. We knew it was incorrect. It was much, much smaller the number than we use in the actual reality.
That is the great Victor Davis Hanson. And for those of you who didn't get enough of his wisdom, we'll have him on again next week. Quick break, and then we're back with our signature segment, Say What? All about the man who wants to be your 46th president, Joe Biden.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
It is time, beyond time perhaps, for our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. And how about a COVID-free Say What? I say yes. So we enter a COVID-free zone and turn our lonely eyes instead to Joe Biden, who apparently decided he couldn't wait any longer to answer the lingering, increasingly damaging allegations of sexual assault by his former staffer, Tara Reade, who claims she was sexually assaulted penetrated digitally by Biden when he was in the Senate 27 years ago. So the presumptive Democratic nominee granted an interview to Mika Brzezinski of MSNBC and declared his innocence.
Based on the investigations that have taken place so far, to the best of my knowledge, by two major papers, they interviewed dozens of my staff members, not just senior staff, but staff members, I'm told, at least that's what they said, and nobody, this was not the atmosphere in my office at all. No one has ever said anything like this. These claims are not true.
The problem Biden ran into with his campaign's claim of exoneration is that one of the papers he referenced there, the New York Times, says it did not discredit the claims, but reached no conclusion on the veracity of Tara Reade's allegations. But Biden picked MSNBC to break his silence on the matter, presumably thinking the Trump-deranged Mika Brzezinski would handle the matter more delicately, given the network's pervasive far-left ideology, but not exactly. Mika was unexpectedly aggressive once Biden got his formal denial out of the way, including a pointed question about whether Biden now regrets his unquestioning embrace of the entirely uncorroborated allegations made by Christine Blasey Ford, designed specifically to defame and destroy a prospective Supreme Court justice.
But why is it different now? Do you regret what you said during the Kavanaugh hearings?
What I said during the Kavanaugh hearings was that she had a right to be heard. And the fact that she came forward, the presumption would be she's telling the truth unless it's proved she wasn't telling the truth. Or not proved, unless it's clear from the facts surrounding it, it's not the truth.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave when we virtue signal to deceive. But old Mika kept plugging away like a prosecuting lawyer in a deposition, asking the same questions over and over to see if she'd get different responses. And sure enough, Uncle Joe let his guard down a bit and rambled.
Are you absolutely positive there is no record of any complaint by Tara Reade against you?
I am absolutely positive that no one that I'm aware of ever has been made aware of any complaint, a formal complaint made by or a complaint by Tara Reade against me at the time this allegedly happened 27 years ago, or until I announced for I guess it was in April or May of this year. I know of no one who's aware that any complaint was made.
Please email me if you understand that answer. But the upshot of it all is that Biden and his fellow travelers on the left will now be hoisted on their own petard. The assertion which they've shouted from the rooftops anytime Trump or any Republican gets accused of sexual impropriety, that the woman must be believed even without a single piece of evidence. And indeed, many, if not most, on the left persist in the belief that Justice Kavanaugh was guilty simply by virtue of being accused and being a conservative. So that creates a sticky situation for the women Biden is considering for his running mate, including one who's a media darling and is openly campaigning for the job, Stacey Abrams, who went on CNN and had no choice but to say the Kavanaugh case and this are, well, different.
I believe that women deserve to be heard, and I believe that they need to be listened to. But I also believe that those allegations have to be investigated by credible sources. The New York Times did a deep investigation, and they found that the accusation was not credible. I believe Joe Biden. I believe that he is a person who has demonstrated that his love of family, his love of our community has been made perfectly clear through his work as a congressional leader and as an American leader. I know Joe Biden, and I think that he is telling the truth and that this did not happen.
So Uncle Joe gets the benefit of the doubt, of course, from the woman willing to do or say just about anything, including the untrue statement that the New York Times said that Tara Reade's claim was not credible. Anything to get on that presidential ticket. But what happens when she's confronted with the hypocrisy of it all by people more concerned about sexual impropriety than presidential politics. But for what it's worth, the former vice president was endorsed by the woman who he says should rightly be sitting in the Oval Office right now.
I'm really thrilled to have my friend, the former senator and former Secretary of State, and the woman who should be President of the United States right now, Hillary Clinton.
I want to add my voice to the many who have endorsed you to be our president. Just think of what a difference it would make right now if we had a president who not only listened to the science, put facts over fiction, but brought us together, showed the kind of compassion and caring that we need from our president, and which Joe Biden has been exemplifying throughout his entire life.
What you notice in the talking points of Stacey Abrams and Hillary Clinton and most Biden supporters these days is how Joe is just a great guy, a family man, a man of deep and abiding compassion. Problem is, that doesn't distinguish him from millions of other kind, compassionate family men scattered across the country. It's hardly a qualification to be president, but the Biden campaign apparently feels it's a winning argument against a president they believe, honestly believe, is hated by the rest of the country every bit as much as them. And Biden himself is hardly immune from Trump derangement syndrome. Consider his claim, with no basis, no statements, no evidence, that Trump is planning to postpone the election, a serious claim which, just like that of Christine Blasey Ford, is entirely baseless.
Your likely Democratic opponent, Joe Biden, recently suggested that you were considering changing the date of the election, that you might try something like that. That's my first question. The same question.
I never even thought of changing the date of the election. Why would I do that? November 3rd. It's a good number. No, let him know I'm not thinking about it at all. Not at all.
Well, perhaps the president put that matter to rest. We close, say what, with the most clear evidence yet of how the media is serving as almost a campaign arm of the Democrats by outright blaming Trump for COVID-19 fatalities. It's this question asked by New York Magazine correspondent Olivia Nuzzi at one of Trump's briefings.
The American president loses more Americans over the course of 6 weeks than died in the entirety of the Vietnam War. Does he deserve to be reelected?
That's Olivia Nuzzi of New York Magazine. Think she would have asked Barack Obama the same question? And after a quick break, we'll come back and ask the question, should President Trump start opening up his press conferences to more than just the anti-Trump elite media?
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Where can you find honest political commentary with sobering analysis, accountability, deconstructing threats to our liberty, and boldly reporting the truth? Subscribe to LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
Combat propaganda and defend freedom at Liberty Nation Gen Z. LNGenZ.com is your portal for news, videos, and worksheets without the spin. LNGenZ.com. A free-thinking future starts here.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
On and on and on it goes, and where and when it stops, nobody knows. Probably never. President Trump goes before the media, the same elite media which has been kneecapping him every day since he took office and well before. And they carry on doing everything in their power to make him look bad or evil or dishonest. depicting him as either a bumbling buffoon or evil genius, depending on the day. If you thought the elite media might mend its ways during a public health crisis which has left tens of thousands dead and tens of millions out of work, think again. They've treated this as just another in a long line of Trump scandals, falling right in line behind James Comey, Stormy Daniels, Russian collusion, the Ukraine phone call, and all the other impeachable scandals they've been shouting about for years. So this week, LibertyNation.com editor-in-chief Leesa K. Donner unleashed a trio of articles imploring the president to invite some new media to the party, media that actually approaches the subject of Trump with some semblance of journalistic integrity rather than simply using their platforms as megaphones for the leftist agenda. And Leesa joins us now. Hello, Leesa.
Hi, Tim.
Well, thanks for joining. I've very much enjoyed your articles, and they're very instructive. But tell us what you are specifically proposing that the president do to bring some new faces into the crowd of media covering the president.
Well, the president keeps doing the same old thing and expecting a different result. And he's not going to get it from the legacy media or the establishment media or the mainstream media, whatever you want to call it. And I think what needs to happen is for the White House Communications Office to step it up. They should see that their boss is more than a bit frustrated. And I think people who serve the president would serve him well if they opened up his world beyond NBC, ABC, Morning Joke, and the rest.
Boy, that's just perfectly stated now. You and I were both trained in journalism during our college years, so we look at any subject less from the standpoint of advocacy than journalism. Is it too great an exaggeration to say that, with some exceptions, the elite media has exchanged journalism for advocacy?
Well, Tim, a couple years ago, Christiana Amanpour, the great CNN correspondent, was accepting a journalism award from a large organization. And she said in her acceptance speech, quote, "I believe in truth, not neutrality." That statement on its face is just staggering. That is not what I learned in J school. I doubt it's what you learned in J school. But this is what I think a lot of people are following this methodology. They have an agenda and they feel that they have a right, indeed a duty, to push it.
Well, Christine Amanpour actually said that right after Trump was elected. It was just a matter of a few days later. And she said, OK, now we've got to transform from being journalists to doing the right thing and taking this guy down. Now, you also have some relatively mild criticism of the president in your piece, in a way, writing that at 73 years old, Trump is a captive of the mainstream news institutions primarily because of his age. In line with his old habits die hard adage, it's easy to understand why he picks up the TV remote every morning. What should he do instead?
Well, Tim, it wasn't so much of a criticism as it was an observation. I mean, Pew Research did a comprehensive study on various pathways of news consumption in 2016. Their report showed that 85% of those 65 and older get their news from television. And that includes Trump. So I think these outdated avenues to get their news fix is a problem. And the other thing that Pew noted was that people are intensely loyal to their avenues to the news. In other words, they'll keep going back to the same thing over and over, even though he knows he's getting beat over the head.
Now, you also don't spare Fox News from your criticism, particularly one anchor who seems to be rubbing a lot of people the wrong way over recent months. And I hear people complaining about him all the time. Chris Wallace, why?
If I had a penny for every time I heard over the dinner table some conservative railing about Chris Wallace, I would be a very rich woman. Look, I don't know if he has some kind of a self-confidence problem trying to fill his father's shoes. I don't know what he feels like a journalist should be combative. So, but there is a way to be combative that includes common courtesy, like letting people finish their sentence. And Wallace doesn't seem to adhere to that. So he comes off as very grating and quite obnoxious.
He is so intent on gaining the approval of the mainstream anti-Trump media that he goes out of his way to do it. That it seems to be so obvious to the viewer that he's going to be, I'm Chris Wallace, and I'm not going to be another Fox News, Sean Hannity, whatever. And I think in the meantime, he's sort of cut himself off from his ties to conservatives by doing all this. And he's never going to be embraced by the left like maybe he thinks he will, because he worked at Fox News. And to the rest of the mainstream media, that means he has no remaining credibility.
Well, and that's the problem. I mean, I think the legacy media does a number on its own credibility by trying to be part of the Democratic presidential campaign, whoever that might be. And Wallace doesn't do himself a favor. He needs to understand that, the buck doesn't stop with him. He's not the only person in the world that asks hard questions. He could tone it down a bit, I think, and still get respect, a good reputation, and maybe let the people he's interviewing talk a little bit.
Yes, and maybe one of these days he will gain at least a modicum of the respect that his father legitimately had. Mike Wallace, one of the great investigative journalists of all time. Now, you write about how the New York Times recently published a lengthy piece that paints a portrait of President Trump as the crazy uncle in the attic, walled off from the world and constantly obsessing over his 90% plus negative media coverage, addicted to daily so-called rage viewing. Do you think the Biden campaign could have produced a more perfect piece for their own campaign?
Well, that's the problem, isn't it, Tim? I mean, why are these people engaged in stumping for campaigns? Why don't they just give the American people the basic information and stop omitting information? I mean, staying silent on Tara Reade is a problem. Now, finally, the Titans, Washington Post and New York Times have spoken up about this. But, it really... It doesn't serve them well. It doesn't serve the American public well. And, I think the White House press office really needs to open up the president's world to places like Liberty Nation and myriad of other places that are out there working hard to give a more balanced, reasonable, logical view of what's going on.
Thank you, Leesa.
Thanks, Tim.
Leesa K. Donner, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, because
Truth
is making a comeback.
Combat propaganda and defend freedom at Liberty Nation Gen Z. LNGenZ.com is your portal for news, videos, and worksheets without the spin. LNGenZ.com. A free-thinking future starts here.
Where can you find honest political commentary with sobering analysis, accountability, deconstructing threats to our liberty, and boldly reporting the truth? Subscribe to LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
What's real? What's not? We are LibertyNation.com, and you can rely on us to bring you the real story in real time. We've waded through the swamp, filtered out the fake news, and serve up a daily diet of political insight and analysis on all the top stories every morning. Because truth is making a comeback.
And now we have reached the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitle Talkin' Liberty. It's when we reintroduce our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, and as we like to call him, or at least me, our guardian of individual liberty, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you back. Let's talk about the gun control lobby. Gun control advocates were sort of staring down the barrel of a figurative loaded gun, Scott, but have now dodged a bullet in a case decided by the Supreme Court this week.
Tim, the law in question that New Yorkers basically couldn't travel legally with their firearms was so odious to the constitutional rights of the people that the legislature ran back to change the law for fear that a decision would come down from the Supreme Court bolstering gun rights. The gun rights proponents challenged that change and said that they shouldn't be allowed to prosper from gaming the system like that. But the Supreme Court found that the case was indeed moot because of the law change, Tim, and we will get no big Second Amendment case, win or loss, from this court this term.
Oh, those clever leftists, taking the law out of force, making it moot so that they could tell the court, hey, don't waste your time with this silly appeal because we already changed the law. But maybe it's a good thing that they changed the law anyway, Scott.
Well, for that, yes, we can be grateful, Tim.
Yes, okay. All right, fair enough. Let's take a trip overseas, something you and I aren't really allowed to do today. But let's do a virtual trip over to France, which has issued the staggering total of 915,000 lockdown tickets to drivers.
Tim, over $12 million ticketed, and these are for people not having papers. And the reason why I brought the story forward, it's just for somebody who, was born during the Cold War, the specter of European countries demanding papers of their citizens and finding them without them. I just thought was very frightening. And I think it's always important to remind everybody that the liberty isn't stolen with a sales pitch that it's going to be stolen liberty. It's always for the guise of something good.
Now, you're not sure that this isn't just a scheme to try and balance the unbalanced budget for the country of France? I mean, because 915,000 lockdown tickets, that's a lot of income for the government, Scott.
It's a win-win for them, Tim. They get the power and the money.
Wow. They can have it all. Now, the Supreme Court, we'll go back to them for a moment. They've ruled that Georgia cannot put the law of the state of Georgia behind a paywall.
Yeah, the state of Georgia, Tim, published their laws digitally and in a book that had keynote citations. Basically, these are tools that lawyers use to be able to cross-reference and things like that. And they're often done by states in league with legal publishers, namely LexisNexis is the monster. And the problem is that they don't publish alternate versions. And so if you want to republish those books, Tim, then you have to pay basically the private company. Well, that seemed odious to a number of good government sort of advocates in Georgia, and they sued. And they actually won their case in the lower courts, but they encouraged the Supreme Court to take this case so that there would be a nationwide standard, which is what we have now, that those laws, including the citations, if they are in fact published by the legislature, they are not copyrightable.
So then, if you're in Georgia, you got to pay to know what the law is?
No, you don't have to pay, and not just in Georgia. It means in the United States now, the state can't make people pay for republishing this information.
Well, the whole thing is is that a 21st century argument or what? Anyway,
I think what the interesting thing about it, Tim, is what happens when cities and states get in league with private industry to profit from the people. That's sort of to me, that's the interesting factor here. They've partnered with a commercial enterprise.
Now let's move over to the Trump administration, which has threatened, now they haven't taken any action yet, but they publicly threatened to sue states that don't lift pandemic orders. On what basis are they making this threat, and is it something that any individual states should worry about?
Well, General Barr has said, I'm directing each of the U.S. attorneys to be on the lookout for state and local directives that could be violating constitutional rights and civil liberties of individual citizens. Now, given what we've seen, Tim, in terms of discrimination against churchgoers, we have county health officials saying that the sacrament or host is not an essential part of religion, for instance, in one county I know of. There's a lot going on there that I think runs afoul of our constitutionally protected rights. And it's nice to at least to have some lip service paid. It would be better to actually see some suits, I think, come down the pike for some of the more egregious actions. But the funny thing, too, about this story, Tim, I know that you'll appreciate this, is that New York Attorney General Leesa James issued a counter statement basically saying that they're prepared to defend the state's authority against the federal government, by the way, acting. Now, let's recall, this would be the federal government acting to advance individual liberty. And the best part about it was that Ms. James cites the 10th Amendment as a basis for her brushback of the federal power, which is just a hilarious thing for those of us who know that, it's probably the first time she's ever asserted a 10th Amendment.
I was going to say
anything, right?
I think this is probably the first time since like the 1960s that the left has cited the 10th Amendment, which they consider to be all but a dead letter because it gives the states way too much power, according to them. And one more story before we leave, Scott. A Tennessee state board has been accused of violating open meeting laws. This doesn't sound like a terribly sexy story, but I think it is an important one.
This has to do with the Tennessee Bureau of Elections and Campaign Finance and a state representative called Joe Towns, and a civil penalty fine that he was going to have to pay for not filing proper campaign finance reports. Now, that is a relatively minor story, Tim, I think. But this coronavirus lockdown stuff is going to be like the full Employment Act for lawyers, I think, going forward, because there are all sorts of things like this. And they basically what they did was the board, instead of following their open meeting laws like they should have, or waiting, they held private Zoom meetings and just reported the outcome. So whether it's school boards or election boards or kids' classrooms with terms of service, I think that this is just the trickle right now before the dam breaks. And as soon as these courts are back open more regularly, Tim, we're going to see, I think, a real tidal wave of all sorts of cases like this.
Yes, all the members of your profession are pretty much salivating at the thought of post-coronavirus litigation. Which areas of the law do you think might be particularly effective for them in trying to get settlements?
Oh, I can only think of the Privacy Act violations with regard to all these teachers using different video sharing services with young children without getting proper, basically releases. That seems to me to be someplace I would look.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue, with our own Mark Angelides, all of them available on demand at LibertyNation.com, where, by the way, you can pick up the LibertyNation.com brand new Roku channel. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And for heaven's sake, stay healthy. We'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.